like I'm close to 15 kids that are non-English speaking, and we've had to do a WIDA or two every now and then,
Sure.
right? But I mean, just the overall understanding how to serve, the language barrier, the WIDA. I mean, it's just for our smaller district to have not done that before and to have it all at one time across grade levels. So you can't even concentrate a teacher somewhere, right? So
Right.
it's just, whoa.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
time consuming one. The speaking
It
test
is.
is hilarious. That's my highlight of my day, listening to that.
Oh, yeah. So we're in deep as well. I'm learning as we go. Obviously, I'm not taking the lead on it, but it's been interesting.
Well, if your testers need any trade tips, I'm here for
Yeah.
you.
Hey, thanks, Doug. Seriously, you may regret having said that in public on a recorded line.
Our EL specialist should start here soon, who's really good too. So
Oh, exciting.
That's been
Yeah,
I don't know.
Serena Wright has been Serena Wright's been pretty helpful to us as well. Trying, I know she's got a lot on her plate, but she's been pretty responsive as well.
Good.
So
Yeah.
we just got my Lexia to try and help with some stuff. We're trudging through. We're trying to do our very best. So yeah.
Stephanie, your dog is very cute.
Thank you. He's a little jealous right now because I'm not paying attention to him. So
Totally. All right.
Just a reminder,
go ahead.
I can only be on about an hour today. Sorry.
Yep. I know there's people that are jumping in and out today. I very much understand. So, which I think is fine, right? We're going to be going through the different sections. So we'll just jump in, reminding folks that we are recording and live on YouTube. We will be working today to go through those different sections that we assigned each of you. Thank you, Lance, for being a wordsmith in a way that I am not. And so to sort of start getting that drafted in different sections, I do want to remind folks that, since we sent this out and everyone was looking at it differently, there's still going to be lots of time to have conversations on each of these sections. But I think that we've got a good start. And it'll sort of help us maybe shorten our time a little bit together, given sort of all of the sections 15 to be exact that we need to go through. And if we agree with Lance's suggestions, we'll have 2 more. So we'll go through those today and have some conversations. I took all of the suggestions that folks shared with me. I know some of you did, some of you did not, and that is totally fine. But I took all of the ones that were shared with me and put them into one red line document. They didn't totally match up always, so I think that's okay. We'll have time for conversation on some of those sections to determine how we best want to move forward. And again, we're really hoping to form consensus in each of these areas. I really want this group to feel good about the final product and what it is that you are going to be making recommendations to the Board of Public Ed on. So we're going to spend some time today going through those. So I'm going to pull up that document if you guys are okay with it. Oh, actually first, sorry. I do just want to quickly, I know the agenda is like very basic, but one of the things on our agenda was the minutes from our last meeting. Thank you, Richard, again, for putting those together. Wondering if people took a look and had any questions or had any changes they wanted to make. All right, seeing none. For the rest of our meeting, we're going to move into these sections and have conversations about them. So I'm going to share my screen. If other folks would like to share their screen when we get to their sections, that's totally fine. But I'll be taking notes and trying to redline as we go. Let's see. All right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Totally.
Just conceptually, are we all on the same page that we're not developing a different subchapter, that we're trying to make the changes in stream within the existing subchapter? Is that something that that we can resolve early, or is there anyone that's suggesting a completely different subchapter?
Thank you for bringing that up. I do want to give folks the opportunity to talk about that. I know we, when we left our last meeting, we had sort of talked about 2 different paths forward. One of incorporating the early literacy targeted intervention requirements into the preschool standards, and the other was to create a whole other subchapter specifically for that. Christine, go ahead.
I appreciate, Lance, that you're putting that front and center, because I think that that's something that came up in conversation that I had with Tammy and Lori about the teacher qualifications, and then Colette and I also talked about it yesterday with the content standards and the developmental domains. I think if we separate it, it continues to build this divide of what we're talking about, what we hope to see in the state. I think, and once we get to some of these sections, I'm hoping that there's a way we can put the early literacy intervention pieces front and center for the purposes of what we're currently experiencing in the state, but by keeping this subchapter of the early childhood education standards, it sends a strong message from my perspective, from an advocacy perspective, is that these are the standards of high quality and of excellence that we want to see once we do get to that place where we do have preschool. So I think that there's a way to do this really well within the same subchapter. Again, if we take out just literacy, it's really hard to do that. And ethically, as an early childhood professional, we can't just separate out just the literacy pieces. There are pieces that could be applicable. And I think that having that there as part of rule would be really helpful as we provide guidance for districts and folks who have been doing this really well in a high quality way throughout. So just my 2 cents, I think keeping it as one, but making sure that we're acknowledging our charge here. And that's to highlight the early literacy intervention. That's what folks are going to be looking for. In all of my revision conversations, it's always been like, okay, what can we anticipate for a question, a challenge, and what's going to be our response? And so just really thinking about trying to approach it in that way. So it reinforced just this belief that these standards, the content of them really demonstrates the high quality experience that we want our young children to have in our school settings. And so highlighting the early literacy intervention gives due honor to that piece of it where we're at, but then it also includes those other pieces.
I really like the way you've characterized that and agree wholeheartedly. It forces us to confront and specifically decide if we're going to pull something out and treat it differently. We don't do it just because we're sitting over in another subchapter and need never confront what's in early childhood right now. We have to be very deliberate about it. And I think that's the better way to go, so that we don't sort of put literacy in a box and pretend it can be isolated from the concepts of early childhood development.
Well put, Lance.
Anyone else have any questions or thoughts about maybe this approach moving forward? Okay. Thanks for starting us off that way, Lance. I think that was a good clarification to make off the bat, so thank you. All right, we're going to move into these. First, you'll see very clear that we're changing this from preschool to early childhood education. You'll see that throughout this document. Wherever there was preschool, it was changed to early childhood education. And then that whenever we're discussing them differently as programs, you'll see preschool programs, and I think it's early literacy targeted interventions implemented through a classroom-based program for 4-year-olds, I think is how the language is. So you'll see that's kind of a mouthful, but I think it makes it so much more clear of what we're talking about. So as we go through the document, I've tried to really clarify that language and keep it consistent. So if it looks a little different than maybe what you read before, it's only because I'm trying to make language the same for consistency. I'll also say up front that I've gone back and forth with like the number 4 and spelling out FOUR. I just don't know which one's accurate for rulemaking, so I need to check with folks at Secretary of State. But if you see it back and forth throughout the document, it's only because that's just the way I did it very quickly. So don't be too alarmed. Christine, go ahead.
Quick question. I love the red line, just helps us to see original to revision. When we get through today, and then will we be able to look at a clean copy that doesn't have all the strikeouts? Is that possible? Just to read through for cohesion. I know it needs to be submitted kind of in rule change in this way. I'm just wondering if that's a possibility, or if this is how we're going to be reviewing.
Yeah, this is definitely the way that we have to submit it to the Board of Public Ed as a recommendation to set it up for rulemaking. But after today's meeting, I can definitely give you also a clean version. That's fine. I'm happy to do that.
And the version that I drafted was set up so that let's assume for the sake of argument, and I'm not assuming this, but let's assume for the sake of argument that everybody agrees to every change that's in here. You could do Control A, cover the whole document, right click, accept change, and you'd see a clean copy. It'd be that fast. But you know, I'm not suggesting that that's what we're going to do. I'm just telling you, it's really easy to show a clean version.
McCall. I just
Yeah.
have a logistics question. So we go through these, like on this first one, is it, hey, everybody look at it, and if you don't have a problem, we move on? Or are we going over every single red line? I'm just trying to prepare my brain for what's about to happen.
I
good.
actually I love making sure that I clarify for people if I've done something, what I'm doing and why. And some of the times it'll be easy. Like, you know, we can agree that every time it says preschool and it's stricken, it says early childhood education. Is everybody okay with that concept? Boom,
Right.
done.
That's kind of what I was asking, right? I mean, some of them are just repetitive changes for language change, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I do though. I mean, so this one, first one, for example, Marie and Danielle looked at it. I want to make sure I give them an opportunity
Got it.
to weigh in and share any other changes that they saw. You'll see right here, I highlighted this section because I was like, oh, we have some new rules we're putting in here. It probably will no longer be subchapter 3. We need to be thinking about you know, some of those things when we're referring to other pieces within the same document, if we're going to be changing numbers. So there's just some things like I highlighted for my own reminder that they'll need to be changed in the future, but maybe those are things other people picked out too. So
Can I make an early pitch here on one key threshold issue?
Sure.
And then I will make sure I'm quiet as much as I can, okay? But like early on, just this is one of those forks in the road on line 3. And I want to make sure I call it out as such. So, you know, this is this chapter is now going to address preschool for kids aged 3 to 5. And then that's for preschool programs. And then for the ages of 4 and 5 for early literacy targeted interventions implemented through the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds. Okay, so and I do that very deliberately here, because when they're done with the classroom-based program at age 4, they will then be matriculating or promoting whatever to kindergarten. And the K-8 standards, at least the way I intended with this language, would then take over and address the Jumpstart program. A Jumpstart program doesn't happen until the kid's done with the classroom-based program. And the other thing that's implicit in here is that I'm not touching the home-based program at all, because the law's got that wonky deal that says must be provided by a nonprofit provider, must be research-based, and that's about it. So I just want to call out that this language is very deliberate in focusing the entire scope of this subchapter as it relates to targeted intervention to the 4-year-old classroom-based program. And I recognize that there may be discussion and debate on that concept, but I want to make sure I bring that forward.
Thanks, Lance. Yeah, I want to start to see if anyone has any questions on these two concepts, given that you'll see them numerous times throughout the document. The first is striking preschool and replacing early childhood education when it's referencing both programs. And then second is what Lance just mentioned, is sort of calling out specifically the early literacy targeted interventions implemented through the classroom-based program. So I want to see first, before we get into, you know, calling on folks who were assigned these sections, to see if you have any questions or concerns about those two changes, because you will see them numerous times. Christine, go ahead.
And do I need to keep raising my hand? I want to be respectful.
Jump in.
Okay. Like, otherwise I'll keep like toggling back and forth. My only other thing that I think we should be mindful of, because I was getting tripped up with this too, is if I really like this where we see preschool, we change it to early childhood education. There's this public preschool piece of it. I just want to make sure that if we're using public preschool, just to make sure that that's consistent too. I think that that's just another look at it. Like when I read this, trustees may establish early childhood education programs, because those could be targeted early literacy intervention, classroom-based, or public preschool. That's an umbrella. So just thinking, and I'm happy to help to go, it doesn't change the flavor of what we're saying. It helps to further distinguish that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so the word like public preschool is here kind of in different places, or even like Lori and Tammy, when we were talking about teacher qualifications, just saying like, once we do get to public preschool, it'll be P3 required. So just thinking like, how are we using this public preschool? How are we using early childhood education? Because these are two different things, right? Early childhood education is this bigger umbrella. Yeah, Lance, what do you think?
I think that out the gate, so we use before these changes have occurred, it was only for public preschool. So we were deliberately not regulating a private preschool program of any kind. I mean, I suppose you could eventually get to the point where some may come to you and ask for accreditation, sort of the way that some of the private schools do for MHSA purposes. But the rule as it existed was for a public preschool, and now it is for a public early childhood program. And so everywhere else that you see throughout this entire document is that the scope of this subchapter is only as to a public early childhood education program. And I think that at least one way of doing it is do just that in the first line and then never mention it again. Or come in and say public targeted literacy, public preschool, and either one will work as long as we understand what the objective is. If the objective is to limit the scope of this chapter to public programs, then that early salvo on the first line is one way to accomplish it from there forward.
So you're saying
That
keep
makes sense.
preschool in on line 2 there is the one spot you want to keep it in?
I keep preschools in here quite a few times, and every time it's in here, we would either have to go back in and say public preschool each time, or we'd have to rely on the introductory language in subsection 1 saying that the whole purpose of this chapter is for trustees to establish a public trustees, so elected trustees in a public school system, to establish a public early childhood education program, which under the terms of this chapter now with the amendments includes both preschool and targeted literacy in the classroom-based program.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I know I was supposed to review this section. I know Nell's not on today, but that was the only question I had about, sorry, keeping that preschool part in there. But if that's our blanket term where we're keeping it so it helps with the rest of the definitions, that makes sense to me. You're muted.
So am I hearing, I know, God. Am I hearing from folks that you're okay with the way it's written? Are there other clarifications that need to be made to make it more clear?
Have we, McCall, I'm sorry, and I rushed through this when I was putting it together. I mean, I did it carefully, but I didn't do it enough to recall. Do we have a definition section in here?
There is, yeah. Marie has that one. It's the next one.
Okay, because and here's something that is my pet peeve in the past, long past. The Board of Public Ed used to have sort of a penchant for going in and defining terms and then never using them again in the entire chapter. And so any term that we use should be used because we're going to repetitively, any term that we define should be defined because we're going to be repetitively using that term every single time with no variation. If you goof around and change one little part of it, it's no longer the defined term and you no longer have the safe base that you're launching from. So when we get there, we'll just want to make sure that we're describing, that we're defining a preschool program. And that might be another place for us to say public preschool, or preschool means a public preschool operated by an elected board of trustees in a public school district under the laws of Montana or something like that.
Great. Any other thoughts on 101? Marie, I'm going to let you take it from here. I know Nell wasn't able to join us today. She's in and out of some other meetings, but offered to help anytime after this. But take it away if you had any thoughts, questions, suggested revisions beyond what you see here.
You know, the proposal put forth was great. So it was very clear to me of the consistency with ARM language and how to spell that out. Looking for consistency, like what Lance just said, in the trustees of a school. I don't know if we need to compare to other ARM, and I haven't taken the opportunity to do that just to make sure that's consistent, but that's the one thing I can dive into to look at a little bit closer. But otherwise, I think it's very clear for schools.
That's a great call, though. It's trustees of a school district. So that's just existing language. So we sort of go, oh, it's like, it's part of the grass. It's already on the ground, but we should be using school district because that's what trustees supervise and control.
Then do you think we need public in there? Or is that yes? Or is
The
it please and-
trustees of a school district, you could point to 20-6. Hold on a sec here. I'll pull up my other resources so I can kind of keep them running as we go, okay? School
And
district.
I'll take notes too.
Yeah, school district is defined in the code, and it would be a good place to just point in there. It's Title 20, Chapter 6. So if you want to just be globally appropriate here, because then you've got elementary, K-12s, and unified school systems, you just say the trustees of a school district pursuant to Title 20, Chapter 6 of the Montana Code Annotated.
Yep. Perfect. I can add that in there.
That's a great call, Marie.
The only other question I have, not necessarily good or bad, having the word curriculum in there, and I understand it's tied with curriculum instruction and program delivery standards. As we're so like focused on saying content, is it different at the 0 to 5 level or 3 to 5 where we don't want to say, or we do need to say curriculum? That's just one of those trigger words that could go either way, right?
Mm-hmm. I think when we get to that part, and Maria, I appreciate that. When Colette and I were talking about the standards and developmental domains yesterday, there's a part of putting the literacy stuff front and center, which you'll see when we get to 110, but then also in the curriculum part, that's much more about routines, play-based, interest area. Like it's much more, and I'll be curious to see Doug and Lance, I think you guys had that section. I think that talking about curriculum, instruction, and program delivery, this also elevates the value. I mean, this is part of our P12 system. So we do have curriculum, instruction, and program delivery. So I think being consistent, the more that we can demonstrate that high quality early childhood education, as defined and described here, is part of our public school system using that same language, I think that's going to be better.
No, that's perfect. And mostly just looking for that consistency, making sure that that's throughout, and I did not dive through the rest of them. So that's really all I saw in this in terms of 101, but of course we'll always listen to other people's suggestions.
Great. The only thing I wanted to point out for you guys was under 3 here. I did change the language in here to make it consistent with the language in chapter 53, which is the content standards. It just said, well, there's some conflicting language and you guys can decide how you want it to be. We can review them and revise them on a 5-year cycle, or we can review and revise them on a reoccurring schedule. The language is both in 54 and 53, and I imagine you guys are going to be cleaning that up, Marie, but I'm curious maybe what your thoughts are on sort of pinning that down for 5 years, or just maybe a different schedule as the board sees fit.
Okay, sorry.
I like recurring. I think things happen, if there's like big legislation that comes out that changes content standards, that totally throws off the rest of the schedule, I think having recurring means that we won't be evaluating standards from 1999 anymore, but we'll at least keep it on the docket.
Yep.
World languages.
Yeah, I'd make the argument there's nothing educationally relevant intrinsically about a 5-year schedule. 5-year just means don't get out any further than that. Recurring allows you to adjust according to the specific needs you're facing.
Yep.
Great.
I would agree.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Okay. Any other thoughts on 101? Again, I'll get this to you redline and clean after this.
McCall, I just see right up the very top that you're just missing a D in childhood underneath subchapter 1.
Childhood. Love. Great. Thank you.
That was easy.
Well, Well, I caught some of my own mistakes earlier, so please do read these. All right, let's go into new rule 1. And Lance, I wanted to maybe as we go through this too, think about if these are the right places for the new rules. There's 1 and 2. The way that rulemaking works is you put them at the end, and then you if it's gonna go in the middle, you have to renumber everything. But so just be thinking about where you guys want these to go. And if this is the right place, great, but this won't be where it is in the rulemaking. But I'm gonna let you explain this. Go ahead, Lance.
Well, first, I didn't have any intent as to where I placed these, other than just recognizing that they weren't necessarily addressed. And so what this is just signaling out again that all the early childhood education standards here, which are for both preschools and targeted literacy interventions, are focused on developmentally appropriate supports and strategies to enhance learning outcomes. This is again where we use the cadence of a child between 3 and 5 for preschool and 4 and 5 for targeted interventions implemented through the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds. So then use of the standards for public preschools are subject to the limitations of funding. This is just to make very clear to people, because we as often as it comes up, it's best that the board signal to the audience and that the audience understands that there's a funding restriction on preschool, and that there is no funding restriction, but there are funding rules on targeted interventions. So that's just where I lay this out. There's 2 types of early childhood education programs. They're both applicable or both subject to developmentally appropriate supports and strategies. One has a funding restriction, the other one has funding rules.
Questions? Karen, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
There
you go.
Sorry. This is my ignorance, but I think it's clear, but Lance, could you help me? Because the first of the jump starts are also gonna be before kindergarten starts. Would they be covered in this as well?
You know, if I'm remembering correctly, the first jump start is after completion of the 4-year-old classroom-based program in the summer preceding kindergarten. So it will be for kindergarten eligible kids. Now, I'm not, there's absolutely a fork in the road decision there. I don't currently have any of the Jumpstart programs subject to this chapter. If you wanted to, you would have to say, back where we reference both in the first rule and now in this new rule here, where we say early literacy targeted interventions implemented through the classroom-based program, and you could say, and the Jumpstart program preceding kindergarten. If you wanted to make these rules applicable to the first Jumpstart program provided, then you could. And if you didn't want to, you'd leave it like it is now. I'm not an expert here, and I defer to all of you who are. But I made the choice of, because these kids were on the cusp of coming into kindergarten in September, and this was a program that had to immediately precede kindergarten, that it was okay to hand off the baton to the K-8 certified folks and the kindergarten curriculum standards. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's the way it's written right now.
Well, and if I can jump into the rule that you guys all put forward that does have the language for the Jumpstart program, it does say that they must be aligned to early childhood education standards and content standards for English language, arts, and literacy. So that language is in there, Karen. And I think, although it's in the other rule, I think that for folks who are looking to do the Jumpstart program, it'll be much more clear that they need to look to these standards if they are doing that pre-kindergarten piece. But again, like, because they're also going into kindergarten, like Lance said, they could use the kindergarten ELA.
Okay, and I don't have a strong preference. I was just trying to think about from the perspective of what y'all thought on making it as clear as possible.
If you want it to apply to the first Jumpstart program in particular, preceding kindergarten, you would want language saying so in here. And what you do is you'd search and replace for every place where we have that relatively long sentence, where it says for early literacy targeted interventions implemented through the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds, you would say, and the first Jumpstart program preceding kindergarten.
I guess I am in support of putting that here just because we've been up against an uphill battle trying to teach kindergarten standards to 4-year-olds in our 4-year-old program. So any opportunity we have to say, hey, acknowledge like it's appropriate to teach them using the early learning standards if they're 4 years old, I say let's put it in, but that's just my vote.
And McCall, do you have this in review mode on your end? Because if you have it in review mode and you do a search and replace, and I would just search for through the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds and replace it with through the, you know, I mean, so take a look at your exact language in the rule.
Yep.
And then reiterate it in the replace and add, and the summer and the Jumpstart program preceding kindergarten.
Great.
And to make sure you don't unintentionally capture other places where it might say in isolation, the classroom-based program, I'd say through the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds. And I would then replace it with through the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds and the Jumpstart program preceding kindergarten.
Oh, I will do that.
And for the good of the order, I don't object to that at all. It's a technical deal about where you guys wanted to draw the line.
Any other questions or thoughts on that change or the section?
Just real quick
One.
clarification. So the year preceding, the Jumpstart year preceding kindergarten would allow a teacher to use early education standards or kindergarten standards?
Well, I don't think that we clarified it, that the way that it says in the Jumpstart program is it says both, and it doesn't clarify like for 4-year-olds. But if we're going to clarify that here, then that seems pretty clear to me that the 4-year-olds preceding kindergarten would need to be using these rules and not chapter 53.
I
Is
agree.
that how you hear? Yeah.
Right, but they would use the 4-year-olds preceding kindergarten will use early childhood for Jumpstart.
Yes.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions, thoughts before we move on?
I would just say that obviously makes most sense because the students who would be attending are those that were not successful at meeting those standards in early ed. So then teaching them with kindergarten standards is not really setting them up for success. So I just think that we're reviewing some of the early learning standards they did not achieve in the early ed program.
Are we good to move on to definitions? Okay. Definitions, you'll see the changes that we discussed here, changing preschool, making this language here really clear about the curriculum. We'll get to that. And I think, Lance, if you want to explain that too a little bit more when we get to that section, or go ahead and do that now. We could preview it.
This is just where I clearly segregate out based on the discussion we had last time that the developmental domains apply to targeted intervention to the same degree as they apply to preschool. And it's only with regard to the literacy portion or, you know, and I know we talked about content or curriculum, but I think it's currently written as the content areas. Only the literacy content area would apply to targeted intervention. And I think that's necessary to comply with the terms of the bill.
Mm-hmm. And that's how Colette and I did that content standard and developmental domain area, which didn't make the cut for the agenda today because we just worked on it yesterday, but you'll see that in that section in 110.
Great. I'm going to go back up. Marie, do you want to explain any questions, thoughts that you had for revisions for the section?
Yep, you fixed the one thing I saw. So instead of just for a targeted literacy, you fixed it to early targeted. Yeah, that was great. My question is, in terms of definitions, do we need to cite the new rule, the early targeted literacy, or do we need to add those definitions within here because one may not be referring to the other as they go back and forth? So do we need to define under Learning Center if we have like this could be a classroom based, it could be, and then also the Jumpstart, or is that too much and we just have the reference to the other code in there?
I think the way we've got it written right now with the recent change we just made, that
Okay.
the entire scope of this chapter would apply only to the classroom-based program for 4-year-olds and the Jumpstart immediately preceding kindergarten.
Do we need the Jumpstart definition in here or just?
You could, but it's terms of art that are already used in the code.
Okay.
So I mean, I don't know what the prevailing wisdom is, McCall, but you can either reiterate the definition in the code, or you can point to the title 20, chapter 7, part 18. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think I personally don't think it's necessary because it's such a focused term of art. It's not using generic terminology. And it's and your sources of authority in here are going to likely be sourced to 27 part 18 as well.
Perfect. Yeah. I just think some reference to the rule is the only thing that I saw really missing. But of course, I am not an early childhood expert. So if those people also want to speak up to see what else would be in there, but that was my only wonder. Thank you, Lance. I'm new at rulemaking, so.
Oh, you will be an old hat soon.
I know.
With all the things that you have going on.
And McCall, your legal staff will give you the new sources of authority. If they won't, you should probably start plugging them in repetitively here, where you've currently got 27-101 and 117. You need to get in the 27-18-01,
Yep.
02, 03, etc.
Yeah, I'll add those too. I added those to the other rules, so I'll just add what we added there to here.
Okay.
Authorization and implementation. One thing that I will do too, based on sort of your comment earlier, Lance, is to go through the rule and make sure that all of these terms are used repetitively in a way that is meaningful. That is one thing that we have been doing with our rules when we go through them. If the term is not being used in rule, we're not going to define it here. So I will go through those and make some changes for you guys and at least make recommendations. All right. Any other questions or thoughts on definitions, specifically to that part about including additional language from the new legislation? All right. Seeing none at this time, let's move to 103, leadership. Again, you'll see the change from preschool to early childhood education. And then you'll see a new number here, and I will let Lori and Tammy explain that.
Don't see Tammy, do you?
Oh, she's not on. She may not be on.
So very quickly, you'll notice it's an encouragement, not a hard fast. We just felt it was really important to continue to acknowledge the role of preparation for people teaching younger students who need targeted early intervention. And so our recommendation is that professional development completed by K-8 should be tailored to those interventions, so that if a K-8 teacher is going to do it, let's encourage people to make sure that they have the appropriate professional learning to do so. And that employing districts and accredited educator preparation programs are encouraged to collaborate to develop professional development that supports attainment of that P3 for these younger. It's not required. It doesn't make anyone have to do it, but it acknowledges the specialty and expertise that the early childhood education P3 endorsement has. So again, it's supporting the specialty, but not requiring it. And we just felt like under the leadership, we should acknowledge that. If somebody doesn't want to do it, they're not locked in, but we want to acknowledge how important it is. Questions, concerns? And we did have the opportunity, just because Christine and Tammy and I were on a call together, to run that by Christine as well, because she has expertise in that area. And we all three felt like that was important.
Doug, I see your hand up. Doug Reisig, go ahead and ask your question. You're muted.
All I want to say is, Lori, I appreciate the flexibility here. Thank you. From a practitioner standpoint, I think it's very important for school districts to have that flexibility. So thank you.
Yeah, and that was our point too, and you'll see that in the next one too. But we want the flexibility, but we also want to acknowledge and honor the expertise of that younger, the licensure for the younger age group.
And if I can just add to that too, Lori, because we'll get into this with our teacher assignment place too. This is where that struggle is of thinking about, just as you said, just that honoring the expertise of the P3 endorsement as we think about having some public funding for work with 4-year-olds. And so this was a nice way of kind of helping trustees and districts to see where there's opportunity to be able to hone that expertise, which is a really nice way of putting that there too, of just of talking about some of that and mentioning the P3 endorsement here as well.
Yeah. Again, it's not a lock-in, but it's a strong encouragement.
And I just want to clarify too, one of the things when I initially got this recommendation from you guys, it said chapter 58 in there. And I just went ahead and sort of used the blanket term accredited educator preparation program providers. That's just, I think, more accurate. And I'm going to go back and make sure that that's actually the term that we use throughout other rules. So I'll go back and check that and make that change if needed.
Then can I make a pitch only to explain why I did, because Lori asked me to technically write that piece of it. I specifically use chapter 58 because there's been times in the past when we get in down the rabbit hole of what does it mean to be accredited? And there were some changes that sort of blur the distinction between what's accredited and what's approved. And so I'm fine. This is your guys' area of expertise, but I specifically put chapter 58 because I wanted it to be clear that it was a prep program accredited by the Board of Public Education under chapter 58, not something that was approved by an education agency in Texas that, you know, sorry to go down that
I appreciate that.
Based on that, I wonder at the end here, so qualifications leading to an early childhood education P3 endorsement pursuant to 1058-531. Like we could is that what you're saying, Lance? Just to specifically mention that part?
Yeah, the intent of the way that Lori asked me to draft this was to make sure that specifically that the Montana University system, and I know that we also include others that are not part of MUS that are accredited, but that we wanted to provide an encouragement to MUS and school districts and teachers that were K-8 certified teaching in targeted intervention to explore the possibility of aligning their professional development to lead to a P3 certification. P3 endorsement, sorry. So, you know, I just want to make sure that we're comfortable with, or that we don't believe there is ambiguity by using the term accredited without tying it to chapter 58 accreditation.
And maybe what I'll do, Lance, is I'll find exactly where that language is and just put pursuant to 1058-10, whatever it ends up being. So I think I can do that. I'll just clarify what that is. I was trying to look for it, but my phone's too small. Okay. Anything else on 103? I know it's the screen's this big. Anyone else have questions on this section or want more clarification on the new number 3? Tammy, go ahead. Oh, you're here. You must be muted. Oh, shoot. Well, hold tight. Maybe she's still in the... Sorry about that, Tammy. I just promoted her. Tammy, you're in now. Go ahead and unmute. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. I had an appointment this morning and it ended up going long, so I was in my car starting the meeting. I really do appreciate the attention to that professional development section in 103. And I felt like Lori did an excellent job of presenting this. So thank you, Lori. That's it.
So thank you. All right. Anyone have any questions before we move to 104? Great. 104, teacher assignments and qualifications. There were lots of questions and conversations about this one. I'm just going to turn it over to the group, the group being Lori, Tammy, Christine, and I know Lance had lots of conversations with folks too. So I'm going to let you guys jump in on this and explain maybe your rationale with the language that we're seeing here.
Hey, Christine, I was just going to start with what we talked about already real quickly and then let Christine and Tammy. It's really the same thing we just said for the other one, right? It is really honoring the importance of P3, but allowing flexibility for districts. We want to make sure that districts do not choose not to do this program because they cannot hire someone, right? We want to give ultimate flexibility while still supporting and encouraging P3. And so saying that the licensure is early childhood P3 or K8 honors all of that expertise and necessity while also recognizing district local control and flexibility to be able to put qualified people who have K8 into that position. That's my quick version.
I think that was well put, Lori. And I was going to say that this area, I would expect really strong and somewhat divisive comment, just kind of in that anticipation of just advocating for our P3 endorsement. And if you remember, Tammy and Lori, I had a hard time just coming to some acceptance and comfort with this too. And I thought a lot about it. Allison and I had a chance to text back and forth this morning even. It's hard to be a P3 teacher educator and not require this. And I shared that in our phone call on Friday. But I think, Lori, you said something really important. And Tammy certainly is part of that conversation and others here on the call, helping us to understand what it's like for a district to start something new, to be able to follow the law, to require an endorsement. Obviously, the endorsement in the teacher education system is something I very strongly believe in. But when you require something that then could be prohibitive and not have a program, that's a concern, right? But then also having a program with just anyone is a concern. So there's this, I just share this because I think we need to expect that there's going to be some really strong public comment. I really want Allison to share her perspective today too. I wondered if there was a way to say teachers with either an early childhood P3 endorsement, is there a way to say that that is preferred? I just think that wherever we have a nudge or a nod to try to like get things that way, I feel like is helpful, but kind of hold on that in a moment. Allison, will you share your perspective?
Yes, absolutely. So I really appreciate the time and conversation that I know that this piece and then the earlier portion of this bill has taken, and they're both connected. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to offer 4-year-old programming. So understanding the roadblocks that can happen and certainly want to be that as just make things as easy as possible for districts. One thing that obviously my preference is that it's a P3 is the required endorsement. That's not a surprise given that the field that I'm in. And really the reason that I feel that way and would love to see language that encourages it to be preferred or pursued within a time period is because the content, curriculum standards, everything that follows in the remainder of this bill is not captured in an elementary teacher preparation program. In fact, it just doesn't exist. It exists for K8, but it does not touch on programming for 4-year-olds, service delivery, any of those pieces. And so when I think about writing this rule, I know we're thinking about to get it off the ground and running, we want districts to implement this as soon as possible. But if this sticks around for a long time, would it be just as challenging to change this later on? And I just wonder about, just in truly knowing the way that teacher preparation programs are set up, elementary ed programs do not speak to the content that's in this bill right now that we're reviewing.
And Allison, I completely agree. I don't disagree that P3 endorsed teachers would be really highly qualified and appropriate for this. And I mean, I'm not gonna, die on a hill on whether or not we put preferred, as long as we have the flexibility and the local control. I go back to, and I shared this at length with Tammy and Christine and Lance and Doug, and I think McCall, my passion and expertise area is middle level. And it makes me crazy professionally that we don't have a middle level endorsed program for Montana. I think that middle level endorsement to teach 10 to 15-year-old young adolescents is the most appropriate endorsement for teaching young adolescents. However, we don't have it. And I guarantee you the teachers we do have are doing a bang up job. Just because they lack that endorsement does not make them unqualified. And so I just want to be careful to honor the work and the expertise of P3 while not hampering districts in their local control and flexibility. I mean, I would love to have all middle level endorsed teachers across the state teaching our 10 to 15-year-old young adolescent, very unique population, just like P3 is a unique population. I just think we have to be super careful that they are equally accepted in teaching this program. And then if there's any hint one way or the other that down the road only one will be accepted, or right now only one will be accepted, I think that that could be very challenging. Again, I'm not gonna go crazy over whether or not, while a P3 is preferred, elementary is acceptable. We've got to have local control and flexibility, knowing that K-8 teachers can do a very good job, and many of them are currently for 4-year-old programs, as they've been forced to teach 4-year-old programs. The only option we've had is K-8 for years. And so while P3 is certainly very highly qualified and appropriate, that doesn't mean that K-8 is inappropriate.
I appreciate that response. And I think the only thing that I would say as a unique piece is the 4-year-old element and how that's not a part of elementary ed prep programs, and nor is implementation through like play-based approaches and whatnot. And that's just missing there. And I think it's important to recognize I'm not saying that it's not something that teachers can't learn on the job, or that can be that they can't catch up through quality professional development. I just I think that the difference is we're talking about a 4-year-old group, which is unique from the K-1-2 previous.
Yeah, definitely unique. Yeah. And it's just like, we're working hard to bring in strategies for our teachers who teach 10 to 15-year-olds because they didn't get it. Right. I mean, so we have some professional obligation to our kids and our teachers to make sure they have this support, which is why Tammy was so adamant in the previous subsection 103 that we acknowledge how important that professional development is. Because if we're going to do K-8, we've got to provide quality professional development. I think that allowing either one of them honors both and says that we can do both. And the previous one encourages the endorsement that we saw in 103.
Tammy, I see your hand up, and then I see Nicole and Lance, so we'll go that route.
And I see Lance's too. So I wanted to add something for consideration here, because I hear and feel Allison's angst, and I teach in a pre-K 3 program. So one of the literacy elements of the pre-K 3 program at SKC are part of my purview. But one of the issues that's not here, and Nell and I had a very short sidebar email exchange about this, is reading specialization or literacy targeted intervention. What does it take to be an interventionist in this area? And I was attempting to address that by adding that language for professional development up above, but I also do believe that individuals with that level of specialization would be highly qualified in relation to the targeted intervention if they have developmentally appropriate preparation along with that reading endorsement. I think that would be another thing for consideration. So that muddies the water.
Nicole, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question for probably Allison or anybody who knows. Where can you get the PK3 endorsement? Is that a whole nother, is it 2 years? Is it 1 year? Is it on top of an elementary teaching degree? Like,
Yeah.
talk to me
Yeah,
about
I'm
it.
gonna
I'm
let
happy
Allison
to.
for that because there's
Yeah.
great pathways because we've thought about that to make it really streamlined.
So if you're an existing a teacher who has an existing K-8 elementary license, you can pursue a master's degree that's 100% online from the University of Montana that is endorsable in the area of early childhood. If you do not want to pursue a master's degree or you already have a master's degree, you can take 4 to 5 courses, I believe that it is, and it's an early childhood endorsable graduate certificate. And so that for a teacher who has an existing license, that's probably the easiest pathway in Montana, given that it's 100% online and that coursework is job embedded and designed to be applied in your working environment. However, for teachers who do not have that, we have a number of programs through MSU, UM Western, SKC, a variety of programs at the undergraduate level and graduate.
Okay, so what if I have a para that wants to head this direction? I mean, they got to get their elementary ed degree and then they have to get this on top, or is there a
No, there's a P3 license that's standalone. If you're pursuing it for initial certification, there's a P3 license.
And what education is required for the P3 license?
It's a bachelor's degree.
Same that you'd expect for an LEd. So it's the same, it's a class 1 license.
Same timeline.
Endorsement area is P3. I think it's worth noting, just in what Allison shared, is that there's lots of option available. So for an endorsed teacher, say K-8, for them to continue moving on the salary scale, there's graduate certificate there's also adding an endorsement, which wouldn't require an entire degree. That was really important. Right now with our P3 endorsed folks, if you remember back from the report that was shared with the Board of Public Education, I'm recalling this number, 166 P3 endorsed teachers currently employed in our districts. That's not a tremendous amount. We've seen those shifts, and Colette and I were talking about this yesterday, about our P3 endorsed teachers. Are they staying in state? Are they going back to their home state? Are we prepared for the capacity? Absolutely. So our campuses that offer the P3 endorsement, whether as a bachelor's, a master's, a certificate, we are ready for folks to be more interested and to pursue this endorsement, and at a way that is value added. Even just in speaking with Lori and with Colette yesterday, in positions of mentoring and supporting folks who are working with 4-year-olds, recognizing where that PD and that education is needed is really important. In order for an early literacy intervention to be successful, just to highlight something that Allison said, an early literacy intervention targeted for 4-year-olds would require a skill set in that teacher to know how to work with 4-year-olds. And while our emergent lit classes that are required for K-8, they don't touch upon some of the other pieces. And this is why that preference would be for P3. And so again, just kind of coming back to that, I would really encourage us to think about putting that in. I also wanted to throw out there, and Nora, I see your hand is up too, is that there was some language that Lance had suggested about requiring P3 down the road. It muddles that space, and Lori, you helped me to see this and understand this a little bit better too, is that if we are in a spot, and this is what I'm not a district, I don't manage a district to understand what accreditation looks like. If you do class 5 license, like all of that kind of stuff, this all has implication for the school. And so thinking about what is it that we want our teachers who are working in a targeted early literacy intervention to have the skill set to be successful, to help support those learners. And to do that, we know that P3 is preferred. And I think that that's where we have to think about where some of that encouragement then in working with districts and doing a much better job of knowing where these programs are starting to support those folks and say, hey, here's some opportunity for you. Here's some coursework. Here's a pathway. How do we make this accessible? How do we make this affordable? And that's what Allison and I and our other colleagues across higher ed, that's what we try to do. And so just to throw that out there.
Lance, go ahead. I saw your hand. Oh, Nora, you can jump in, and then we'll go Lance.
You go
and then
first,
Doug.
Nora.
All right, so here's what I was thinking about. So one, like when we have to go through accreditation currently, even though we have an early kindergarten program, all of the districts do, right? That offer early kindergarten, they have the exceptional circumstance. So the staff have to be endorsed, even though it was considered K. We actually had to make sure our staff were endorsed in P3. And so my school is actually lucky enough to have SPED endorsed and P3 endorsed staff. So Anaconda's utopia, and no, you can't steal my staff, but it worked out really well to have that. The one question that I do have though is the districts that currently offer the early kindergarten that will be transitioning to this early literacy, this early childhood program, are we going to limit them if we encourage the P3 if they only have staff that are endorsed in K8? So that's one question I have. And then I do like the verbiage that is that the P3 is preferred. I mean, I feel like it's a very different world, early childhood, and working in, you know, a pre-K through 2 building for 10, 11 years, however long it was, it's a different world. And you really have to have people that have that knowledge. So I like the preferred P3. I just worry that it's going to limit some districts from shifting their program. I guess that's a concern I have.
I'll let you jump in, and then Lori, I see your hand up and I anticipate you're going to maybe try to answer that question. So Doug, go ahead first and then we'll go to Lori.
Hey, I'm in the line somewhere.
Sorry, Lance, you put your hand down, so I thought you were like good to go. All right, you go first, Lance. I should have known.
I was just going to say a couple of things here. First of all, it'd be really easy at the tail end of B to say elementary K endorsed individuals working in targeted literacy interventions are encouraged to use the professional development referenced in the preceding rule to attain early childhood P3 endorsement. So just reiterate and point back and say, see what we said back there, we mean it. The other thing that you might do if we were looking for common ground and we were at a point of division, and I don't believe we are yet, and I hope we don't get there, but you could maybe say that don't we still have accreditation with distinction, McCall? Do we have that term?
No, we do not.
Did we get rid of it? That was in August of 2022. All right, never mind that. I was just going to say, maybe you say that you get accreditation with distinction only when you have early childhood P3 or whatever. But now the last issue and the pitch I'd make for you as to why we really have to get this off the ground and we cannot afford to have an immediate P3 requirement is that I've been fighting tooth and nail on this thing for 13 years. As soon as we got full-time kindergarten under our belts, we started looking for how we could explore early childhood education in the face of overwhelming opposition to the concept. And we encourage districts liberally to use exceptional circumstances. You can find my first reference to it, calling it out as an available innovation in 2009. And after all those years of really, really pushing with some pretty firm language in the code, empowering local control, we got up to 1,200 or so kids, which is 10%. Way below the watermark of what we were trying to do, which was get to the point where in the absence of specific support for preschool, we could at least work on early kindergarten to help readiness and help improve learning. And so what we've been doing successfully for the last several years is we've gotten to the point where you've got some teachers, I assume quite a few of them, that are K-8 certified that are the only ones doing early childhood education right now, unless you're looking at an anecdotal pocket where somebody's doing it voluntarily with a Title I grant or something like that. That exceptional circumstances is probably the closest approximation of early childhood education going on in any sort of a global way. And if we throw up a new requirement for the people that are already teaching in those classes, eventual or immediate, we're going to have people say, yes, too much trouble. I'm not really getting anything for the summer jumpstart program. I just got more work for more money, but it balances out. And the 4-year-old program is the one that is the one where if I feel like I'm trying to do the right thing, I really expand this and I go for broke. And I don't think we have people that are of a mind to jump forward if we throw up what they may perceive as a roadblock to doing so. And correspondingly, I don't think that targeted intervention in any way with a brand new program and uncertainty. Look how quickly things turned on us with the 95 mills recently, and how close we were to going into the next session, $160 million in the hole, but for a Montana Supreme Court opinion obtained by MQEC. If you have the rails go off, if we have a recession, if you have the legislature suddenly go upside down on what they think they've got, targeted intervention could be put right back in the box before it gets off the ground. And I think the best way to ensure that targeted literacy gets off the ground, and I say this with full recognition of this recording occurring, is to take the legislature at its word, having passed this on a bipartisan basis, and enthusiastically jump forward and get 6,000 kids in this program as quickly as we can. And I for that reason, I really urge us to take this consensus / compromise between Lori, Tammy, and Christine and run with it.
Doug, go ahead, and then Lori.
All right. So I guess I really feel like it's important to emphasize the preference for the P3 endorsement. And so I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in there. So I feel like there is such a dramatic difference between the structure of P3 versus that K8, and how those teachers can work in the classroom. It's just completely different. And I guess I would also argue that what we have been doing in P3 hasn't necessarily be working, or else we wouldn't have House Bill 352. So I feel like my proposal would be just to start that B with while an early childhood P3 endorsement is encouraged, comma, and then just leave the rest of that.
Nice organization on the sentence, Doug. That's good.
So while teachers with an early childhood P3 endorsement are preferred, yep. Great, teachers with either an early shall be considered, okay.
Am I up, McCall?
Yes, Lori, you are.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine putting preferred, so not even worth that debate, and I would prefer it too. So that's not even a issue for me. I just wanted to respond to a couple things that people had said. Nora, we don't have P3 for our early circumstances. So we do K8 because it's a kindergarten program. So just wanted to clarify that. And I do think it would strongly discourage people if we're not allowed to still have K8. And I do agree that it's a big difference, but it's one step down. And our teacher who's been teaching it for, we've had the program 11 years, does it very well and is very successful. And we do see results for kids who do early kindergarten versus those who don't are the ones who perform better. We have been so careful out of fear of being exposed of people thinking we were abusing the early circumstances. We've only allowed one class, right? Which is why this law is so beautiful, because we can have more classes now, right? So I believe that the teacher we have doing K8 certified, doing our 4-year-old program, she could model P3, right? Is that the case for everybody? I don't know. I'm not saying it is. Sorry, we're in the middle of a building alert, drill. There's a lot going on here. The reality of a school district, right? We're trying to decide what they need to teach, and we're drilling for active intruders. But I think that happens in any grade. I bet any of us could pick any grade in a school in Montana and say, while this teacher is endorsed, they're not as quality as someone else, right? So just having the endorsement doesn't guarantee it either. Not having doesn't guarantee it. I totally support it being preferred. And I told Christine and Tammy, I will join whatever bandwagon, whatever advertisement, whatever marketing campaign you want me to join and lead across Montana to encourage people for P3. And I'm very active in Montana Association of School Superintendents. I'm our regional president. I will sing the praises. I'll carry the banner. I have no problem with any of that as long as it's not required. Can I make a one-word change suggestion? I think there are some people that are going to take umbrage to the term preferred. Could we use encouraged? We use encouraged in the preceding rule. Yeah, I agree with that, Lance, because for the teacher that I have right now, I don't prefer she have it at all. Right? She's doing just fine. If I
But
add a
encouraged,
classroom,
yeah,
I can
encouraged should
encourage.
be consistent with the terminology we used in the preceding rule. And I
Yeah.
think people would take it a little bit better. They wouldn't see it as a, hey, you're saying I'm no good. It's more of a prospective encouragement as opposed to a current assessment.
Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing. I told McCall earlier I have to get off the call today, and I'm glad that we got to this one before I had to leave. But I can't tell you what it does for my heart and soul. I'm not usually a cheesy person, but I got to say it. You know, Christine and Tammy and I were in very different camps on how we what we maybe desired here, and the collaboration and the discussion and the consensus building. Man, I just feel like this is such an example of honoring people's opinions and expertise and backgrounds, and collaborating and seeing how can we get the big mission without sacrificing what we believe in. And I just feel really good about this work. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Christine and Tammy and for taking time and us being able to do this work. It's, I don't know, I'm just really proud of it. And not just this piece, I mean, on the whole. And I don't always find that when we're working with people who are not doing the implementation work. And we've got associations, we've got higher ed, we've got implementation, we've got teachers, we've got administrators. And I don't know, this just feels really collaborative and consensus based, and it makes me feel really good. And so I just felt like I needed to say that.
Thanks, Lori.
So
Colette.
thank you, and I'm sorry I have to leave.
Thank you. We'll chat soon.
Thanks.
Colette, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, what it boils down to is a conversation in the reality of high quality. You know, I've hired teachers before that have the K with the understanding that they will complete the P3 within the first 2 years of their employment. And the difference of how they've evolved as an educator has been, I mean, absolutely remarkable. And then the insight that they provide for their colleagues is just, it creates that school culture of just the high quality piece. We can take kindergarten standards, which some have, and scale them back to create an early ed environment. But the education piece of the why is phenomenal. And just what happens to an educator through the process, I get to see it all the time. When we had the preschool development grant, it was actually paid for. The education piece was paid for staff. So of course they took advantage of that, and they did it. And just to see how our learning environment just transformed as a result of it. So can a K-8 teacher, certified teacher, do it? Yes, they can. But the high quality piece comes from the background knowledge that they gain from doing the P3 piece. So we do prefer it here and highly encourage it. And Superintendent Lacey went as far as saying in your first 2 years of employment, you will. And that spurred them a little bit, and they did. And we continue to have that mindset. As an administrator, it's a very different look and sound in the early ed rooms. So having that background knowledge as the administrator just brings it along that much further. So again, I just want to say, I think our conversation really boils down to the quality and the high quality of it. So that's the importance of having that P3 piece in there.
Thank you for that, Colette. I think I'm continually reminded, and I may have mentioned it in a previous call, that we have a real opportunity as a state, and Allison and I, as representing Institute for Early Childhood Education at UM, where Allison's the director of that institute, we really need to collect data around this. The anecdotal pieces are so poignant and they're so powerful and impactful, but understanding how these programs will run and look based around the very thoughtful attention we're giving to the standards, based around the very thoughtful perspective about advocating for P3, I think we have a real opportunity to pay closer attention to where these programs are, who's teaching in them, and what the impact is long-term. If we're really aiming to look at third grade reading proficiency, that's what we should be looking at when these programs start in the fall, and then measuring that over time. Speaking for Allison, volunteering us, but I feel like this is something that's really, really important, so that legislators listen to data, they listen to facts and evidence and all of those different pieces. And this is going to help us to get there, particularly around this point of endorsement and thinking about how will that grow. Will we have more interest in our P3 endorsed folks? Will we have more hireable and employed people in our early literacy intervention programs and in our early primary grades? I hope so. And so I think that backing this up with a commitment to collecting data and reporting on that is something that I'm really invested in. The other piece I was going to ask, and Lance, I defer to you and Doug and others who have much more savvy around navigating legislative session and conversation. If we were to keep the word preferred and there was conversation, could we then suggest encouraged? Maybe there wouldn't be a bad taste in the mouth with preferred. Or are you, I want to push as much as I can. I want to push as much as I can, but not put something in a danger zone. And I'm just speaking very candidly and transparently here, but I wonder if having preferred, and then when this is presented to the board, having some conversation among that group to see there. What are your thoughts there? Or am I over pushing?
I think preferred is going to be more seen as a characterization of the qualifications of people doing this work, and are going to lead to some resentment. Encouraged is prospective. So the difference between a preference for the current status quo versus an encouragement for future growth, I think is going to be just naturally more attractive to people and less likely to dust up, sort of age-old issues of, I can't even find an elementary endorsed teacher, and I've got a 15% vacancy rate on the first day of school, which are all actually true things. And you're going to, I think that my pitch to you would be encouraged would be the way to go, because it's more powerful and I guess uplifting in perspective, and I can defend it better with people that are going to say, are you out of your mind? Because there'll be some people who say, are you out of your mind for having given into encouragement? And, so that.
Yeah, and I think that's what I needed to hear, Lance. Yeah.
Tammy, I know you had your hand up, and then Penn, I see yours too.
I am fine. Actually, Christine asked my question. I was still going back to preferred.
Okay. And Penn, go ahead.
I will be right back. I'm just muting, and I'm sorry. I'm just muting. I'll be right back. Okay.
Thanks,
No
Lance.
worries. I was just going to say, Christine, if it kind of helps, I'm in that similar vein with Lori right now. I think if we currently didn't have programs set up, I'd probably be like, let's write in preferred. But because a lot of us in the state of Montana have programs already set up, and we have staff teaching with K-8, solid staff with knowledge and science of reading, I think encourage is going to it's going to be less barriers to go with encouraged at this point. But I know every single one of us is going to be going back to our teachers and encouraging them to get some P3 certification. But I feel like, just speaking from a practitioner standpoint, programs up and running that are solid right now, just encouraging stuff. That sounds a lot less scary, daunting.
All right. I don't see other hands up, but Karen, go ahead. I spoke too soon. You're muted again.
That's my day. Sorry about that. We actually had a question on the strikeout on number 3. So if anybody else wants to talk about number 2, I can wait.
No, I think that's a good question. And I don't want to speak for the group, but my assumption is that you can apply for a class 5 regardless of the language being here. That language is all in chapter 57. But maybe I'll turn it over to the group, Christine, Tammy, and if you guys had this conversation.
I struck it because it's redundant, as you just described. Class 5 provisional is for what it's for, and it's for any elementary endorsement, any class 1 teacher, right? So this is just a repetition of something that's already elsewhere in the rules, and it runs the risk of you know, if at some point someone came in here and said, yeah, I kind of like that. Hey, why don't we change this word and that word? You create unnecessary conflict between where the rule has to be found and followed, and where it has to be found and followed is in chapter 57.
Okay, that actually helps me a lot, because we were thinking about, you know, folks within early education studies, early education, early childhood education, or early childhood development would need to apply for the waiver. And we just want to make sure schools knew they could do it. Sounds like they do know.
Christine, did you want to comment on that?
I just wanted to say too, by leaving it at 2A and 2B, then it still highlights the importance of the P3 endorsement in the way that we are able to here. Because if you give another option, like actually, don't worry about P3 or K8, you could have whatever. I think that the way that I read this is I want P3 to be preferred. I want it to be encouraged. I want it to be all of those things because I'm a P3 teacher educator, right? So I won't let go of that piece of it. I don't want to steer anyone away from that, keeping this like, so the end of this section is P3 encouraged, either P3 or K8 for the early literacy intervention. And it's really clear in 2A, P3 is the appropriate licensure for the accredited preschool program. And so when we get there as a state, then we're ready for that too.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. That helps us. You know, Head Starts can use EC bachelors, but we don't have the licensure part of it. So we're wondering if pointing out that waiver would be appropriate. It sounds like no, in your opinion. So that works for us.
Any other questions from folks? I have one question for you. I know you guys are sort of grappling with language and terminology for 2B. I'm wondering if you still want to reference the professional development up in 103.
I think you should.
Okay.
We've already agreed that the professional development is an appropriate, consensus language, and it is the means by which someone is going to become P3 endorsed, and the encouragement is sort of self-executing and referenced. So I absolutely, I think it should. And I think it helps support people that are, giving in on some of their specific interests here that I really respect. And so I think that doing whatever we can to mitigate the disadvantage they may perceive by that, and tying this together as a repeated reference to encouragement, I think is healthy and good.
Agreed. McCall, I can try to send something to that effect at some point after today.
Sounds good. Okay, other thoughts or questions on teacher assignments? How do people feel about it generally? I realize there's still some tension, but I believe that you guys have been talking more collaboratively about consensus around the language that you see here. So I'm wondering if anyone feels very strongly against the terms that you see here in the language.
I'm like this and about like that. So I know that some of my members will give me some trouble. But I'm certainly satisfied that this is as close as we can get to staying together. And I think it's more important for us to stay together than it is to get our particular way on anything.
And Christine, I know when we first started this section, you had commented that we're likely to get some pushback from the licensure world. And I'm wondering maybe if you have any thoughts on the changes that have been made here and how that's going to look when it gets to the Board of Public Ed.
I think it comes back to that piece of, as P3 teacher educators across our MUS system too, just making sure that there's space and value for the P3 endorsement. This group has consensus around that, and I think that we will need to rely on the voices of this group. Last week, I was on a call with Gigi Weisenfeld, who's a senior research analyst for the National Institute for Early Ed Research, and she has accepted my invitation to write a letter of support for a P3 endorsement, just so that things are on public record that really put outside of this advisory council, outside of Board of Public Ed, but from a national landscape perspective about how important P3 is. For me personally, I feel comfortable with this coming to consensus. And so that's in all of my years at MSU and being fortunate to be able to participate in session and public comment and representing early childhood expertise and teacher preparation, that this is the way to do it. We might not always agree 100%. And I think that that's reflective of just what this process is, and having voices be heard and to be able to anticipate that there will be teacher educators. Allison spoke very poignantly about her perspective. And I share that same sentiment with her. And I recognize too, how to put into administrative rule language that does validate P3. And then that next step of how do we support our K-8 folks in this PD plan? How do we in higher ed respond to that? We're ready for that. And I think that that's part of that guidance piece, that next piece that comes. It's always a tricky spot just to be representative of higher education. Like, I'm not every single voice here too. So I would, I'll encourage my colleagues across the state to read this in the lens that they can bring up questions, or if they have concerns, that there's a space for them to voice that. But P3 is represented here. P3 is valued. And that's something that I would speak to anyone. And you certainly all have listened to me very, very respectfully as I continue down that path. Allison, do you want to add anything to that, of how you might anticipate teacher education perspective in response to this?
No, I mean, I echo your sentiment. This one stings for me a little bit, but I feel comfortable with the kind of compromising language that's in here. I will say, you know, it's a constant challenge, even within higher ed recruitment for students, to push the value of P3 just to a 19-year-old. And so I hope that the language in here will encourage some of that messaging, and I appreciate it being repeated twice in 2 sections. And for me, that feels really good. So thank you for allowing me to be a guest in this space.
The other pitch I'd make, McCall, is the next step, and we've got some precedents in the code for this. We've already started to prioritize and monetize particular goals through the Quality Educator Payment. And, the TEACH Act. And I know it's not all that it could be, but it at least creates a framework for incentivizing higher pay for early career teachers. And you might be able to do something similar here. A targeted intervention program with a P3 endorsed individual teaching will receive an additional quality educator payment, or something like that. Or tuition assistance to repay the cost associated with achieving it. So we're wide open to collaborating with others on incentivizing these kinds of things, and just kind of want to put that out and help that we have, we wrote the TEACH Act the first time it was put out there, and we've got designs on writing it better next time. And there might be a place to put this in as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Lance, because when Colette mentioned the preschool development grant and how there were specific grants for P3 educators, it got me thinking that, there may be some leverage that we have now that the legislature, granted us this very awesome and exciting opportunity, but to share with them that, to really do this right, we need P3 educators. And in order to get P3 educators, we probably need to be encouraging folks who have a K-8, or encouraging those 19-year-olds like Allison was talking about. And finding ways to do that, I think would be, I think that would signal to folks who may have some questions or concerns about these sections that we're really willing to go outside of what's written here in rule to support that P3.
That would be incredible. And I think a really significant nod to the importance. So I appreciate that even being considered.
Lance is much better at these things than I am. So good job, Lance. Legislators, they'll listen to Lance. All right. Other thoughts, questions on 104? Certainly we'll have another meeting and can fine tune these things. You'll be able to see after this sort of a more complete version and a clean version. And then when we come together next week, there'll be more opportunities to, like I said, kind of fine tune this information. So, all right, let's move on to 105. I also want to say, as we go through these, we have about another hour until we're going to take a quick lunch break. And we have about 10 more sections. So just keeping folks sort of apprised of where we're at. Karen and Stephanie, go ahead and take this one away. Karen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, okay. So again, I apologize. And McCall, I sent this to you in email. It took us till late to try to, from our perspective, we think the stuff's in here okay. We were thinking about one addition for paraprofessional qualifications. And I kind of have it as D, which I accidentally wrote as E, but I'll just read it maybe. And then, paraprofessionals without the aforementioned credentials may meet this requirement by obtaining a CDA or obtaining a level 3 in the state early childhood project registry. Again, this would be, we were thinking maybe another option. They're both options that we have. The state system, MUS system does CDAs, and then early childhood project registry is required. And level 3 is high enough that they would have at least some skills to assess in a classroom. So if people like that, we thought that might be an addition to this one. So again, it wouldn't be a have to, it'd be another way of assessing your paraprofessional level of qualifications.
Any other thoughts on that? I don't know what any of those things are. So maybe a little more explanation on that would be helpful. Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
One thing I just want to say right off the bat, Karen, if you're referring to the practitioner registry, that's not a state approved system. I'm just thinking back.
That helps me, even though it's run out of MSU. Okay, that helps me, Christine.
But it's not Board of Public Education or Office of Public Instruction. Okay. So we can't, right, McCall, like we can't refer to some other, even though it's like verified, like it's an early educator professional development registry, and that is always in flux too. Just thinking about those different levels, those are not
okay.
Well, my only question about those folks that you're talking about, Karen, would they qualify under C?
Yeah, I think they could.
Okay.
I was thinking of, if you're a new school, you have, who's kind of new to this area, maybe it'd be a way to just help you understand some of the training. But Christine, I really appreciate you helping me know that Board of Education doesn't do that. I always think of ECP, since they're run out of MSU, that it would be, but.
And not to discount that work. It's just, it's these two, Board of Public Education, Office of Public Instruction, administrative rule, just like voted upon, that kind of stuff. Like ECP and practitioner registry operates outside of that.
Yeah. What do you think about highlighting the CDA, which of course is, it's not an associate's, it's not 2 years. It's essentially a 1-year certificate. But it is run through the MUS system. What do you think about keeping that in, Christine? Because again, the higher ed side better than I do.
Sure. And Allison, be sure to jump in too if I'm misspeaking. CDA is not a credential or certificate that's offered across or in the same way as a P3 endorsement. And it's kind of covered by that 2 years of higher ed. I mean, kind of goes along lines with like apprenticeship and all that kind of stuff too, that some of this might be appropriate for. Allison, what do you think about like any CDA? It just kind of, it starts to go down an early childhood pathway. Again, I'm like, if there's anything about higher ed, it's P3. Like it has to be like somewhere like focused to that. I don't want to pull anything else. What do you think, Allison?
I agree with what you're saying, Christine. And I think, Karen, that someone who has a CDA would qualify within the language as it's written.
Okay. And we're fine with that. We were just wondering if it would help. So hearing this, we're fine with keeping it as is, unless someone else, because I know I wasn't the only one assigned to this, if anybody else has something on this.
No, I appreciate the thought about that, because I think it is helpful for us to sort of know what else is out there. I do want to make sure that we don't like create a laundry list. I think that's one thing that we try to prevent in rule. But again, since those sort of credentials will fall under A, B, or C, I think that's a good sign. Stephanie, did you have anything else to add here? Did you have any questions?
No, as I was reading through it, honestly, both sections that we kind of had, I felt like they were worded well for where we need to be with this new document. So I didn't see any changes to be made as far as that goes.
Anyone else in the group have any questions about 104 or 105 or 106? Go ahead, Karen. Yeah.
We actually had something on 106 as well. And
oh, sure.
Again, this was actually a question that we were looking at flexibilities on direct supervision. It has to be a licensed teacher. And when you go up in, I think it's 10.63.115, it looks like it's defined as the licensed teacher that's in the classroom with the para. And we were wondering if it could be changed to leader, education manager, early childhood educator. So again, someone who's licensed, but let's say a school district wants to run early education classes and wants to do some level of supervision of paras at some other level, like have an early ed manager or something to that effect. The way we read it is you couldn't do that under paraprofessional supervision here. And we were thinking that might be useful in some school districts. But again, would like feedback, because again, I'm in the Head Start world, not the K-12 world. But we thought like changing direct supervision to specifying that it could be a licensed teacher or administrative supervisor might be helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm actually looking at chapter 55, which is the accreditation standards. That also has language about paraprofessionals. And I think some of that language was just updated, and I'm just pulling it up here. The way that it's in 1055-715 is both qualifications and supervision. It's sort of embedded into one rule. And it does say instructional paraprofessionals shall be under the direct supervision of a licensed teacher who's responsible for instruction and assessment of students. Sorry, I'm just reading really quick. Do others have thoughts or questions about this section or these sections? And you're specifically talking about 106 now, right, Karen? Sorry.
Yeah, just 106. We were just thinking about that piece and making sure that schools had the flexibility, that it didn't have to be just the teacher in the classroom doing direct supervision to the para in the classroom, that other models could be used.
And is that, I guess, for folks who are in the field, is that how that is implemented in a school? Like direct supervision, it's my understanding when we went through chapter 55 and we're having conversations about this, that it didn't necessarily mean that the teacher was always sort of there in the room directly supervising this person, but that they had a direct supervisor over that classroom. I'm wondering if that's how other people understand it or if that's actually how it's implemented. Go ahead, Allison.
I was just gonna and I know that I've not been the one reviewing these. I know that in another section that we haven't reviewed just yet, there's a conversation about like ratio. And I believe it's written that the paraprofessional is essentially like an assistant teacher as far as there being two people in a classroom of up to 18 children. And so in my mind, when I think about this programming for 4-year-olds, the paraprofessional in this situation would be underneath the supervision of that classroom teacher, because they would likely be performing duties that are akin to like an assistant teacher in the classroom. But that's just my initial thought, and more so just thinking about kind of how the classroom would be staffed. And I'm curious of like Doug or anyone else, who's might be thinking the same thing. Or
I feel like
go ahead, Doug. No, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say that I would generally completely agree with Allison. I think that kind of matches the model that I see in Missoula being used.
Ann, Penn, and Colette, I see your hands up, but I do want to maybe just quickly respond to Allison, what you were referring to. The language that's, I believe, in class size, and we're going to get to that. That comes directly from, I think it is chapter 55 when we get to class size and the language, and it talks about qualified human resources, I think is exactly the terminology. So that would include, volunteers, whether they're parents or folks in the community, and paraprofessionals in that. And it talks about overload. So we'll get to that a little bit more, but it would sort of also encompass paraprofessionals. And Penn, go ahead, and then we'll go to Colette.
Yeah, I was just going to answer a question about what does it look like currently in our 2-year our 4-year-old programs. We have a licensed teacher and then a paraprofessional who works directly underneath that teacher. We have a partnership, and Karen can probably speak more clearly to the HRDC eligibility and the guidelines there, but we do have a partnership with one of our 4-year-old programs that does require both adults to be in the classroom at all times. So we kind of adopted that model across the board. So we kind of use the language of like 2 adults in the classroom, and that pair is always within earshot of that teacher or vice versa. So like, yes, a child might need to be escorted to the bathroom or whatnot, but that teacher is directly supervising them, and that means they're within earshot of one another whenever they're in that classroom. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of our current operating standard.
Yeah, that does help. Colette, go ahead.
I was just going to share that here in Great Falls, currently in my building, I have 16 paraeducators, and every teacher does have a paraeducator because we've exceeded that class size of 11. In special education, we have 2 to 3 paraeducators with every supervising teacher, and I do assign them to teachers just for building that teaming and getting to know those kids and families and for consistency. But they all know that at any point, like, you are an employee of the Early Learning Family Center, and I have that ability to move them as needed. Say we're short in one classroom, I might pull a pair and put them, but they always are under the supervision of a certified teacher. And then I complete all of their evaluations with feedback from the supervising teacher, but I would never have a supervising teacher complete that evaluation solo. Like, I complete their evaluations. So, and just collaboration.
You can go ahead.
And that's how Anaconda does it too. Sorry, I overstepped on someone.
Yeah,
sorry, Nicole.
Jump in. No, jump in. Go ahead, Nora.
Okay. So that's how Anaconda does it too. The Paras CBA actually dictates that the building administrators are their supervisors, but that they are collaboratively working with a teacher, whether it's a special education teacher as a special ed para or as one of the early K teachers as a classroom para. So they are more of a team versus a supervisor. So it's just a member of the room, but the CBA dictates supervision. And I think I would say that's probably fairly close to how most districts operate. That there's usually an admin that's considered the supervisor who does the evaluation, but there's always a teacher who is dictating what happens and what doesn't happen.
Totally. Nora, I was thinking, like, supervision here in my mind takes me more to like that the paraprofessional is not necessarily responsible for the content. The teacher is providing that for the para to then implement with the kiddos. But that's the word supervision is a little bit funny there. I totally understand what you mean.
Yeah, I'm in the same way. Sorry to jump in, but yeah, I do the observations as administrator, but the teacher directly supervises within the day, if that helps clarify.
Thank you guys all for that input. I think it does help. Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you so much. And again, and since you've been working so closely with us, we just see a lot of variability and just wanted to make sure that schools could kind of organize it how they wanted, and this wasn't super restrictive. But what I'm hearing is you are able to operate this way, so we don't need changes. So with that, I guess I'd say we don't have any changes on this one then. And thank you for helping helping me and us understand kind of how those supervisions are working in different school districts.
Thanks, Karen. I think my internet went weird for a minute, but I think I heard you say that you guys have no changes to 105 and 106 based on sort of the conversations and discussions we've had.
Yeah, because I think the types of supervisions that we had questions on, people are already saying they could do. So then we don't need changes. So that's great.
Great. All right, let's go down to 107, which is class size. And I believe, Allison, this is the section that you had referenced. Doug and Nicole were on this section. Doug did send me some of his suggestions based on language from other rules or statutes. So I did, you'll see those here. I tried to incorporate it the best way I could, but Doug, go ahead and explain this to the crew.
Yeah. Am I not muted now, McCall?
You're not. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know this is going to be a contentious one. I know early childhood education advocates want those class sizes as small as they can possibly be. I get that. I understand that. But again, from a practitioner standpoint and the ability to financially make this a viable option for rural schools, I just went back to, and working with Nicole, I just went back to what the standards are currently in administrative rule dealing with class size in kindergarten, first and second grade, to try to make it fiscally possible. And I just costed out what the A and B payments are for kids in this program and what it costs to hire a teacher on salary, benefits, insurance, class materials. Even tried to cost in some things like, well, okay, a teacher's going to be gone maybe 5-6 days a year with illness. How are we going to make this financially work for schools? And that's why I came up with, I think we just go back to the K1 and 2 class sizes. But I know it's a contentious one. I wish it wasn't, but that's just the recommendation, and we can sure talk about it.
I just wanted to jump in and piggyback off Doug really quick. As a district administrator trying to hire, and we understand the small groups are best, obviously, but to get a teacher and a para in one room for 18 kids is best case scenario for us. But this again gives us the flexibility to even get this program going. I think if we limit that to 10, it's not financially feasible for new districts like our district to try to get this off the ground, even with the help of A and B money from the House bill. So I agree with everything Doug said, and I just wanted to give that perspective too.
Some questions from the group. Christine, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to leave for my final and I was like, ooh, I can't leave yet. I just want to remind everyone that from a targeted early literacy intervention, the needs of the 4-year-olds is going to be greater than what you might see in another group. And sorry if I missed some of that. I was grabbing some of my stuff. So the recommendation, this was when this rule was first written, this was guidance by our National Association for the Education of Young Children. I totally get that fiscally and financially, it would be at cost, but in order to have a high quality program and to see the benefit of the early intervention, and I'm just thinking about, and you all know the folks in your district, the children who are in most need of having the intervention, if they are one of 20 who have similar intensive needs outside of special education, right? So we're not talking about that, but I don't know that those needs could be met if you just had one teacher, particularly if it's a K-8 teacher. Because they won't have some of that other piece. That would give me pause. Certainly there would be opportunity for school administration and teaching teams to help to support and provide some PD to help with that. But this concerns me.
So I just have one. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nora. Go ahead.
You guys, I'm so sorry. I just keep stepping on everyone's comments today. I will raise my hand. So the one have is like most districts that are currently offering an early kindergarten through the exceptional circumstance, they generally have 2 bodies in the room. Like, I feel like everybody I know we need to have it written down. I agree with Christine in that like the having two people in a room because of toileting and all these other things that go along with a 4-year-old program are very important. And so while I understand that 18 is kind of the max that we want to get to, I do feel like the 2 people is important. The one thing that is concerning to me on this section is it says to qualified human resources, and it might just be helpful if we enter in those codes that we talked about earlier on the qualifications, because when I hear qualified human resources, it makes me nervous that it's going to be like 2 paras and not a certified teacher. That just makes me nervous. So I'm just saying it out loud. Okay.
No, and I appreciate that, Nora. And that language actually comes from language in our accreditation standards. And what the qualified human resources, what that applies to is for anyone that's in the classroom separate from the teacher. So in addition to the appropriately licensed and endorsed teacher. So it wouldn't necessarily be 2 paraprofessionals, but it also may not be a paraprofessional. It could be a volunteer, something, you know, based on sort of how the school district decides to staff that. And that language was changed just this last year in chapter 55. So I know that's where Doug took that because I was part of that sort of revisions. But I'll just keep going. Allison, go ahead, and then Colette, and then Doug.
I was just going to say that regardless of if this was an early literacy classroom-based intervention or not, I think that it's actually completely unsafe for one adult to be with 18 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds do not sit at desks and do worksheets. They are in the midst of learning how to regulate their behavior, how to talk with one another, how to keep their hands to themselves, how to do a lot of things. And I honestly, I just think it's just completely unsafe from a safety standpoint. And then I also think about, again, how Christine pointed to the fact that these children are going to be qualifying for literacy-based interventions. It is a classroom-based intervention, so there needs to be a classroom element that's running, and the opportunity to intervene within a classroom-based opportunity. And if there's only one person in the classroom and every single child is going to need some type of tailored intervention within the daily runnings of a classroom, I think that just at a minimum, it requires 2 people to be in there. And I would say even that second person in some way is consistent, or else it's unlikely that children are going to respond to their support. And just that continuity is really important. Again, I fully recognize the fiscal limitations and those points being brought up, but I just think it's important to say or share that.
Colette, go ahead.
Everything about this has me concerned about safety. I think about, I'm in the trenches every single day here. And if we have a paraeducator call out sick and we do not have a sub, I am in that classroom for most of the day. Like, I would never leave a teacher with more than the 10 students. On the 11th student, we have a paraeducator in that classroom by themselves for so many reasons. We have so many children coming now in diapers. That requires a full adult in the restroom with one child. And sometimes it's a full change. We're talking 5 to 7 minutes with a classroom that would not be supervised. It's not an easy bathroom procedure. And then you have 4 children possibly in that same situation who have, like, their self-help skills and their independent skills are quite limited in the beginning. So we're building that skill set in them. You enter a lunchroom, you've got all of the children who most of them have had all their meals prepared for them. So when you put them in a lunch tray in front of them, they're needing assistance with most items at all times. And then we have teacher contracted language that says teachers get a 30-minute lunch period and 2 preps in the morning, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. We have recess. So things are coming to my mind thinking that we would have teacher burnout like you wouldn't believe if they were not relieved of some of those responsibilities at some point in the day, and just safety across the board. I have students that leave a classroom. If an adult goes for that child, they've left their class. Just safety all over the place. I couldn't imagine. And we actually do have a classroom right now that has only 10 because we were short paraeducators. We are extremely short on staff, like we all are. So I limited that class to 10 children and we have a wait list. Like, it was that important to me that I was not going to overflow that class for all the things that I mentioned. Like there has just got to be 2 adults after we get past that 10th and 11th child. It's super important.
Go ahead and then we'll go to Stephanie.
I just want to completely agree with everybody else. I feel like the number of students there is really frightening for me about what would occur next year if that was how many kids that we have in these rooms, particularly the ones where we have facilities that we don't have a restroom within the actual classroom. And with one adult would have to, I genuinely don't know what we would do in that circumstance to get a kid to the bathroom. I also I'm not sure I completely understand, so I just want to make sure I get it. So the top line where it's the endorsed teacher for 20 students, and then in one school, the maximum class size shall be 18 students. Like, is that the 18 max and then the 2 more? Like we can have 22 in kindergarten with a para? I'm not sure I quite understand that.
Yeah, the way I read it, and from what I understand from the other rules, it's basically saying that in like your, typical school, there must be one appropriately licensed and endorsed teacher for every 20 students. So it basically makes that 1-to-20 ratio. But if you have a 1 teacher school, so think 1-room schoolhouses, which I don't know when this would ever happen, but the maximum class size will be 18. So you can't have more than 18 in that class. And then from there, it basically just says, should you go above, you can hire a qualified human resources to comply, at the rate of 1.5 hours per day per student overload.
Yeah, just like you can with kindergarten. I mean, the idea of having 22 pre-K kids in there is scary for sure.
Stephanie and then Nicole.
Well, basically, I feel like I'm just reiterating what others are saying too. That number does concern me a lot, just because we right now in Great Falls have a lot of schools or a lot of classrooms that are over, and we don't have those overload aides in our room. Teachers are just having to man up and deal with it. And I'm also on another committee on teacher retention for our union. And I see total burnout with this. I mean, if they're not getting help and they're doing everything on their own, the safety aspect, the number does concern me. And even though it's in writing that class sizes, they'll get that 1.5 hours per student per day overload. We have classes in my building that don't have that right now as it stands. So with 4-year-olds, that's concerning to me too.
Go Nicole and then Tammy and then Ann Penn.
So I just want to make sure that you all understand I'm not pushing for an unsafe environment for our 4-year-olds. That would never be the case. In my mind, ideally for us anyway, in Culbertson, in a small rural school, I am putting a licensed teacher in there with a para, right? And I'm not going over 18. So in my mind, that's what I'm envisioning. So the safety aspect is not something I would ever be willing to jeopardize. Obviously, I don't think that any administrator across the state would be willing to jeopardize safety of 4-year-olds and would certainly hear out their teachers if there's a concern there. So I don't want that number to be like, it's a free for all. We don't care about the safety of our 4-year-olds, because that's definitely not the case. Also, I think it's hard because we're all envisioning different types of programs, right? Like I heard reference to a full day program that has lunch. That's a big deal for 4-year-olds, and feeding 18 4-year-olds, one adult doing that's a big task. But not all of us are going to have full day programs for our 4-year-olds. So I just feel like we have to keep in mind we're building the big picture, not all just one, I don't know, not one size fits all, I guess. So we just have to remember to keep that in mind. I think those are just a couple things I wanted to throw out there.
We'll go Tammy and then Ann Penn.
Just briefly, I really feel that it'd be virtually impossible for there to be intensive intervention with 4-year-olds with 20 students in that space. The safety issue is obvious because of the lack of self-regulation and the enormous individual variation, diversity within that space. But if the goal is intervention, there's got to be some individualized support, and it would be, I can't actually quite imagine how it could be conducted with that number.
McCall, would now be okay for me to offer a suggestion? Is that okay if we move into that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
And Allison, I'm gonna watch to see if what I say is cringeworthy or if you're okay with this. So just thinking, I've heard a lot of people kind of similarly thinking about numbers to what I'm thinking about. So just offering this up as a suggestion, we can whatever workshop this. But perhaps we write in that, we have one endorsed qualified teacher for 10 students. And I think this would apply, Nicole, to a half or full day program. So one endorsed teacher for 10, and you can have 11 to 18 if you have additional qualified para within the room. And then I don't even know if I want to say this, but I feel like overflow, I don't even want to overflow past 18, but if we had to, I could negotiate up to 20. In my mind, I'm trying to see what that looks like, but because we cut it off at 18 currently. But if we were going to do an overflow, I think then an additional para, 1.5 hours per kid, up to 20. That's my suggestion. Pick it apart.
What you just said is more in line with childcare licensing, honestly. And so nothing about what you said is cringeworthy to me, and I think it's much more appropriate. So I thank you for offering that suggestion.
Just bear with me while I do this. It's such a pain in the butt.
Okay,
sometimes.
clarifying question. So are you saying that if I have a class of 15 pre-K kids or four-year-old kids in need of intervention, I have 15 kids and we're doing a half-day program, that I have to have 2 teachers because I passed 10?
I would suggest, it's just my suggestion, I would suggest a teacher and a highly qualified paraprofessional.
Right, that I think is realistic, possibly. But again, I mean, we're a small rural Class C school. So to give 2 humans to this is very hard. Like, we just want to get it off the ground. We just want to start serving our 4-year-olds because there's nothing in our community at all. So not at the risk of safety, obviously. And yes, we want to provide the highest quality possible, but there's some real hurdles to putting 2 adults in a pre-K room for us. For 15 kids is most likely what we would look to see that would qualify.
Yeah, no, I absolutely get that. I'm coming back to Colette and what she described as being in the trenches in her day to day. And I think when you do get over 10 and 11, and you have a student who flees because there's a language, they're not understanding that expressive or receptive piece, and their natural instinct is fight or flight. And that child's gone. It's just really hard with just one person in the room, I think, to handle that. But I acknowledge where you're coming from. I totally get it.
Okay, one more question is, yeah. So if I have 10 4-year-old students for half day, you're still saying I should have a certified teacher and a highly qualified para. Is that correct?
I think the way the language read initially, let me go back and look, was 1 endorsed teacher for up to 10. Is that right? But anything over 10, you would need an additional.
Yeah. So you can see here in black is the original language. And there must be 1 appropriately licensed endorsed teacher for 10 students. So you wouldn't need a para unless you went beyond that. That's sort of what I read here. And I see others nodding. Allison, go ahead. I saw your hand up.
I was just going to say that, 1 to 10 would be within ratio that's met to standards. And I, even though I'm in higher ed, I am in classrooms every single day. They're downstairs for me and I'm down there, and we have half day and we have full day. And I would say that my concern around safety is the same for 3 hours versus 6 hours versus 8 hours. It all comes down to what one adult highly qualified or not has the capacity to do with more than 10 4-year-olds. And so yeah, I think that the suggestion that Ian made makes sense. And again, it falls within basic ratio for even just childcare and operating any type of program, 3, 4 hours, 6 hour or not, for that many 4-year-olds.
Go ahead. Oh, You're muted. I don't hear you. Can anyone else hear? It's just me. Okay. Can't hear you. Maybe try to reconnect to the microphone. Do a little test on your end. Cool. While we wait for you to connect, I do want to go back and give Doug Reisig and Nicole an opportunity to maybe not necessarily respond. Like, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, based on what we're hearing, how do you feel about maybe the compromise of this second one that you see here, this one, which pulls some pieces from the existing language and also that allowable sort of assignment of additional human resources when you go above and beyond the 18? I saw that big breath, Nicole.
The challenges are real. I mean, I just want to start serving 4-year-olds in our community that have nothing. We have nothing. I mean, unless they're going to drive 15 to 30 to 45 minutes away for pre-K, we have nothing to serve these kids right now. The need is real, and I'm very nervous about the barrier of getting this off the ground being required to have 2 adults in there for the entire 3 hours or 6 hours or whatever we offer. I get how to do this best. I totally respect the people who are already doing this and have the expertise. I just don't know for myself how I'm going to overcome this barrier and convince my board I need 2 adults in there. I need to pay 2 people. So, I mean, I am not just seeing dollar figures. I'm hearing you say what's best for kids. I want that. But at the same time, how do I even get this off the ground is my internal dilemma right now.
And Doug, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and Nicole, first of all, I appreciate the discussion. I mean, my whole purpose in this was, I was just going to throw something out there to see, okay, let's get this discussion going as to where we need to be with the early childhood education with our 4-year-olds. And I think I accomplished my task. I mean, people actually were very passionate and very articulate in terms of the positions they have with this. And I get it. And I'm fine with that. I do think Nicole is absolutely right. I think it's going to be a really difficult stretch. I've been in rural schools. I've been in urban schools as a superintendent. I get it. I mean, some places maybe have more fiscal resources than others, and this isn't going to be a problem, but there are going to be schools that are out there when administrators such as Nicole will go to their trustees and say, you know, if we're going to do this, we're going to need to have to staff it in this pattern. And they're fiscally just not going to be able to do it. And then we're going to fall back. Okay, we can use the Jump Start program. We can use the home-based program, you know, to try. We don't have to use all 3. The law gives us the luxury of picking and choosing. This is obviously the best one, having the classroom-based program and having those kids in the classroom. But all the arguments that were raised here in the positions are accurate. I don't argue any of that, and I'm just glad we were able to at least have the discussion and throw it out there and see where we need to be with it. And if this is the direction we have to go from what is best educationally for our kids, and this is what we have to do, and we'll just try to figure out the fiscal aspects of it later.
I do have a quick question, Nicole, thinking about, and maybe you don't know this, and that's totally fine because I'm sort of putting you on the spot, but as we think about what these programs are going to look like, and I'm also thinking that we need to be thinking about the fact that this is going to relate both to the preschool piece and the new 4-year-old classroom-based program piece. So I'm just thinking about from your district, given how small and rural you guys are, how many 4-year-olds in your district generally, whether they would qualify for this program or not, do you think there are?
We would probably anticipate 20 to 30 probably more like 20 to 25. That's about what we average right now is 25 per grade level.
class.
Grade band. Yep. So
And that's like all 4-year-olds though, right?
yep, I would anticipate there's probably around 20 to 25 in our community. That, yeah. How many would qualify? We don't know, but.
Right. Okay. I just was curious about that and sort of how, because I'm trying to sort of think about this twofold as well. Like your school district certainly could offer a early childhood education program for all 25 of those students. You just wouldn't get the A and B for those students who didn't qualify, right? So I'm just trying to think about those things too, of school districts may approach these programs in that way, and how they set them up just based on sort of the need of their community. But okay, questions, thoughts? I don't want to make decisions for you all. I want, folks to feel good about moving forward with one or the other.
Let's go with the compromise language that was proposed here, that you have on the screen.
And the only reason I left I brought this back into play, but then I took it off because literally the sentence before it says an overload of 5 students per classroom is considered excessive. So I think it's sort of repetitive. And that's why I just X that one out, just for your information. Okay. Nicole, are you feeling okay about that? Does it still give you heartburn? Do you think you feel
Definite
compromise?
heartburn. Definite heartburn. But it's going to be a hard sell. It's going to be a hard sell. I don't know if I can get my board of trustees there, but I'm going to try my hardest because I really want to serve our kids in this community, our 4-year-olds, and help them get on track. But yeah, we'll go with it. I'm going to have to crank some numbers with my clerk and we're going to have to try to figure it out.
Nora, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Colette needs to be changed to a panelist. She's an attendee and she can't talk. And then Nicole, the one thing I will tell you is that this rule is helpful for me. So we have 4 classrooms, and the reason that it's helpful for bigger districts is the exact same reason that you are afraid, like are nervous about it. For me to justify to my board, hey, are you really committed to providing high quality, early intervention so that we can increase test scores and all those benefits? Then in order to do that, this rule says I have to have 2 bodies in the classroom. So if your board's committed to doing it, then you follow the rule, right? And so that's kind of the card that we have always played, has been, well, it says we have to have 2 bodies. Is it hard to staff it in terms of funding? Absolutely. So you get creative. So you look at your tuition levy and figure out, is there a kid in the classroom that maybe you can tie a para to that potentially, doesn't cost the district as much money? So there's ways around it. But like, I find that this rule is helpful because it helps me justify the 2 bodies. And so if your board truly is invested in going down this path, even if it's just for a trial period to see what kindergarten, scores look like or anything like that, just so you can get it off the ground, the only way to do that is if you have the bodies to do it. But in terms of cost, if you needed to figure out how to be creative with maybe using your tuition money, maybe that's a way to do it. Just some thoughts.
Does anyone have additional comments with what you're seeing here on the screen? And I'm going to go back and make sure when I sort of undid all the things I did before that it's like accurate. So you'll see that in the next one, but I think we captured it in the way that makes sense. All right. I don't see any hands. I don't see anyone interested in jumping in. Again, we're still going to have opportunity next week to sort of finalize these things. So, as you think about
Nicole.
it, go ahead.
Sorry, Colette needs to be put back in as a thing again. She just sent me another text. Sorry.
I tried to promote her. She getting it? Oh, there we go. Colette, are you here? Oh, you're in twice. I'm seeing you twice. Anyone? Let me try. All right, Colette, if you find your mic somewhere, or somehow just chime in, but we're gonna move to the next one. Sorry, I was trying to give away time. Okay, let's jump to the next one. Was aggregate hours. Doug and Nicole were also on this one. And again, you'll see some changes here just sort of based on the language that that they had sent me. Doug, I do want to clarify, Doug and Nicole, I do want to clarify beforehand that I left this language here in one specific to the preschool program and just added the language that you sent me to 2. We can totally change that. I just wasn't sure if the intent was to replace 1 or to add a 2. So I did this here. Certainly jump in if you had other intentions, but I'll turn it over to you guys.
I'll go ahead with that, McCall, and I may need Lance's expertise on this. No, I'm not looking to replace anything. I was just with number 2, just trying to follow along again with 20-1-301 of the MCA in terms of how you compute aggregate hours, half-time, full-time. I don't know. I get kind of confused sometimes with this, with the targeted intervention program. If a child's there for 3 hours or we've got the 360 hours, but are we doing literacy work the entire 360 hours or how that all computes? But it wasn't my intention to get rid of the first one.
Nicole, do you want to add anything else?
Nope, I'm good.
McCall, I'm back.
Lance is here. All right, jump in, Lance.
Can I suggest something just to make sure everybody understands?
Please.
That the aggregate hours here originally were pivoted to coincide with early edge, and early edge had specific hours designated. I'm fine if you guys think from a standards viewpoint that you should have to have a half-time or a full-time and that you can't have anything less, even though there's no funding whatsoever. I would personally say subsection 1 should be gone because it prevents districts from providing even a drop-in service of some kind that might have only 120 hours a year. This requires, without any funding whatsoever for public preschool, it requires that they go all the way up to either half-time or full-time. And the original justification for that was that that's what Early Edge was proposing to fund. And Early Edge didn't pass, and it's not there. So I would gently encourage us not to require hours for a public preschool program that isn't funded.
So
you guys that know preschool better than me, is something better than nothing? Because you're already asking somebody that this will be a rule that has no home or no occupants. Nobody's going to do it if they not only have to do it for free to begin with, but they have to do it for at least 540 hours for free.
So if 1 went away, Lance, are you comfortable with 2?
No, I think you ought to let fractional enrollments under 29-311 rule.
Okay.
Fractional enrollments start at 180 hours for quarter time, 360 for halftime, 540 for 3/4, and 720 for full time. And we're cutting ourselves out of the loop here on the classroom program if we don't understand and respect fractional enrollment. I think the rule, gosh, I'm sorry for like being a bull in a china closet here, because I was on a call I had to take, but the classroom-based program says A and B is computed according to 29.311. It says it in the bill. So I think that this is unintentionally restricting. That's why I had the whole thing stricken. In my version, this went away because I was going, public preschool isn't funded at all. Let them do whatever they can get themselves into a position to do. And targeted literacy is already identified in the classroom-based program in House Bill 352 as being computed according to the A and B rules of 29.311.
Lance, question. If a school district operates a 4-year-old program, not as preschool, but as an early childhood education program, and they have 25 kids in their class, and only 15 of them qualify for the early literacy targeted interventions. So the school district's going to get 15, right? A and B for those 15 students, but they're still going to be operating beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still saying that even with that information, because it is beyond the classroom-based program, there still doesn't need to be hours attached to that?
Yeah.
It does say half-time or full-time?
No, I think that if you're doing targeted literacy and a district is doing it for free for kids that don't qualify, first question I'd have is why? Because it will take time away from the kids who do need it. And so I get why someone might make that decision. And I even saw that on exceptional circumstances occasionally where you'd bring in some kids for basically role model, average garden variety kids with no exceptional circumstances, and you'd put them in there knowing you're not going to get funding for them. And I respect that. But you still do not want to restrict a school district, especially from what I overheard while you guys were talking about 18 versus 10 and the number of staff. You don't want to go on top of that and say, oh, and by the way, you got to do at least half-time or nothing. When the bill itself allows you to do it at any fraction beginning at 180 hours.
So
I just wouldn't touch it. I don't think we should be touching aggregate hours of instruction, because that's a monetization of the delivery that's guided by these standards. And so, we're restricting what the bill allows us to do.
So Lance, we would receive payment for our qualifying kids, a full A and B payment. Am I understanding that right? I haven't looked at that.
No, up to full-time A and B based upon the aggregate hours of instruction under 29.311.
Right.
Me, go ahead. I see your hand up.
I would like to concur with what Lance is saying. I can see a ton of increased flexibility in being able to go this route in terms of what intervention actually is and means and can do. It's not whole class, everyone getting the same thing all the time. This allows a child to be in for 2 or 3 hours and then not, and the district to benefit from that. And also it opens up different kinds of flexibilities regarding the staffing of this, because you could have hot times of the day when you need both the full-time teacher and the para, and you could have cool times of the day when you have only 5 to 7 kids in that room and you're under your 10 or below your 10 limit. I'd see this as being really beneficial, not to lock in to these. I know even with our early learning center, when we lock into this, we've got parents that want to pick their kid up at 4. They can't pick their kid up until 5:30, or we're not going to get funded for the child in that early childhood setting. And that's really frustrating.
Let me add yet another pitch here. Just by letting the code govern this, and the code already governs it, there's nothing applicable to preschool. So preschool is your oyster. Get it off the ground as best you can, personalized learning. And with the early literacy, we're not adding anything with this rule, and we're potentially taking away proficiency, which is partially the name of the game here. We're trying to get kids back on a trajectory leading to reading proficiency at the end of third grade. That's what we're assessing and determining in terms of eligibility. So I'm just worried and uncomfortable about repeating language in here without the corresponding other provisions in the code that create some flexibility for generating funding, even though you don't have seat time sitting at these particular amounts.
Well, Lance, McCall, if I could, then Lance, let me ask on this number 2, even if this was going to still be included, if it stated something along the line, the trustees may designate early literacy target interventions implemented through a classroom-based program for 4-year-olds pursuant to 20-9-311 MCA.
Yeah.
And call her good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But originally the genesis of this rule was absolutely 100% because Early Edge, which was Governor Bullock's proposal, said 540 hours for a preschool program that was funded. And so we're not funding it anymore. And so we really shouldn't be delving into the amount of hours or the delivery model or any of that.
Okay.
It's a voluntary endeavor that's adequately covered by the developmental standards that are elsewhere in this subchapter.
All right, based on the conversation, and what I think I'm hearing, folks are, well, it sounds like 2 things maybe. One, either interested in striking aggregate hours altogether, or 2, leaving aggregate hours and using the language from statute or from 20, whatever it is in part 18.
My preference would be repeal this rule. It only talks about funding. It only talks about the number of hours. It runs the potential risk of taking away from us all of the flexibilities that we've granted to schools and teachers since this was passed. Even the definition of instruction itself, you guys, is any sort of facilitated playtime. It's no longer just in front of the classroom delivering instruction to kids who are in the same place at the same time. Look at the definition of instruction and how profoundly it's changed under 20-1-101 subsection 18. And this thing is entirely just an artifact of a time when you had to align it with the funding model in the bill that was being proposed. I'm not going to fight you guys if you want to keep it, but I gently request you not to.
Doug, I see your hand up again. Go ahead.
Me, McCall?
Yes, you, Mr. Isaac.
Nicole, since you worked on this with me, are you comfortable? We just strike this whole thing out? I'm comfortable doing that too, at least from the 2 that worked on this. We'll propose that to the group that let's just strike this thing out, the whole section.
All right, others on the council, thoughts, questions about striking 108? And Lance, I assume that when MTSBA writes their policies, that they'll make it abundantly clear that it's a half-time or full-time program aligned to 20-9-311. Okay.
Yep, and we'll incorporate all the concepts of proficiency and personalized learning and broadened definition of instruction, and yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns on 108? All right. We are actually right at our time for lunch. And given that, you know, I see that this is also Doug and Nicole, I'm still gonna stop us now unless Doug or Nicole feel like they need to be gone this afternoon.
McCall, I don't know. I don't think this is a big section here. We might be able to get through this real quick.
Okay, take it away.
Because what we put down here is right out of the bill.
It's true.
Enrollment eligibility.
And I will note too, Doug, I did make one small change in here. You guys had referenced the evaluation methodology is approved by the Board of Public Ed. I just put 1054-901, given that that's where the rule is going to live. So I did make that change. Any questions, thoughts on this one? See lots of thumbs up. Okay. We've got a big afternoon. There's only 4 or 5 more of these, but I know that the biggest is yet to come. So we will come back about 1 o'clock. So just a quick 30-minute break. We'll come back and we'll reconvene and hopefully get through the rest of these, which will allow me time to clean them up and then send them off to you for review before our next meeting next week. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you back at 1 o'clock.